Gustav Jung helped us map the soul, dreams, archetypes, symbols. He gave the psyche a language, but for all the things he saw, there was something he didn't. Not because he ignored it, because back then no one knew how to name it. Jung believed trauma was a psychic wound, something that shattered the inner world, a break in meaning, a split in the self. But modern trauma work tells a different story, because sometimes the wound doesn't speak in dreams, sometimes it doesn't speak at all. It flinches, it freezes, it hides in the breath, the shoulders, the gut. You can go through years of therapy, analyze every symbol, understand every shadow, and still feel stuck. Because trauma doesn't just live in the mind, it lives in the body. And Jung, for all his brilliance, didn't see that clearly. Not yet. This isn't a criticism, it's a continuation. Jung gave us the map, but the nervous system was the part he missed, and now we're starting to find it, but finding it requires a shift from symbols to sensations. Welcome to Mantis Library, where the mind meets its missing pieces. Jung saw trauma as a break in meaning, something that shattered your sense of identity and needed to be pieced back together through symbols, dreams, and story. And for many people, that kind of healing helped. But modern trauma experts started noticing something else. Some people understood everything about their trauma. They could explain it, analyze it, even trace it back through generations. And still, they felt trapped. Because the mind understood, but the body hadn't caught up. As Bessel van der Kolk wrote, trauma is not just an event that took place sometime in the past. It is also the imprint left by that experience on mind, brain, and body. Trauma isn't just a memory, it's a reflex. A shoulder that tenses before you realize you're scared. A breath that cuts short when nothing's chasing you. A jaw that won't unclench even when you're safe. Jung taught us to interpret what the unconscious is saying, but sometimes trauma isn't trying to say anything. It's trying to stay quiet, to not be noticed, to survive. You can't just talk your way through that. That's where the old map started to fall short. For Jung, pain was something to understand. You looked at your dreams. You studied your projections. You asked, what does this image mean? What story is my psyche trying to tell? It was deep work, powerful work, but it assumed the wound was trying to speak, that every nightmare held a message, that suffering had a shape, a myth, a symbol, a shadow you could name. And sometimes it does. But trauma isn't always poetic. It doesn't always wrap itself in mythology or whisper through archetypes. Sometimes it's just a body that learned to brace. No story, no language, just tension. You might not even remember what happened, but your spine remembers. Your jaw remembers. The muscles behind your eyes remember. Because trauma doesn't always show up in dreams. Sometimes it shows up in how you sit in a chair, how you flinch when someone raises their voice, how your body scans for exits the second you walk into a room. It's not symbolic, it's survival. And no amount of interpretation can untangle that. Not if your nervous system still thinks it's in danger. The old way gave us insight, but healing trauma takes more than insight, and safety, it turns out, begins in the body. The old maps showed us the psyche, but they left out the body. That's where somatic therapy began, with people like Peter Levine, Pat Ogden, and Bessel van der Kolk. They weren't looking for symbols. They were looking for flinches, a hand that tightens when someone gets close, a breath that holds during a story, a nervous system still living in yesterday. Peter Levine called trauma the body's uncompleted survival response. It's not about what happened, it's about what never finished, the fight that froze, the scream that never came out, the muscles that never got to run. And instead of asking, "What does this mean?" somatic work asks, "What do you feel?" Not emotionally, but physically. Where's the heat, the tightness, the urge to move? It's not about reliving the trauma. It's about giving the body a chance to complete what it couldn't back then in tiny, safe steps. Jung gave us a mythic lens, the power of meaning, symbols, and inner story. But meaning alone isn't always enough, because some wounds don't speak in metaphor, they speak in muscle. Our healing doesn't always happen in the mind. Our presence is what turns survival into something sacred. For most of history, deep pain wasn't seen as failure. It was seen as passage. Ancient cultures had names for it: death before rebirth, descent into the underworld, the dark night of the soul. It was messy, lonely, yet sacred. Modern therapy often tries to clean it up, diagnose it, fix it. But real healing, especially from trauma, isn't tidy, because trauma isn't just a crack in the system, it's a rupture in the self. And coming back from that takes more than insight. It takes a body that remembers how to trust again, a nervous system that learns slowly that now is not then. This isn't the opposite of soul work. It is soul work, just with feet on the ground. As Gabor Mate says, trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside you as a result. And what happens inside lives in the body. So modern healing doesn't always look like revelation. Sometimes it looks like breathing deeper, holding eye contact, letting the tears come without needing to explain them. It's not just getting back to normal, it's crossing a threshold and coming back changed. In this light, trauma becomes more than something to overcome. It becomes a kind of initiation, and maybe, just maybe, Jung would have seen it too. Because Jung didn't ignore the body, but he didn't start there. He started with myth, with dreams, with the inner world that speaks in symbols. But if he had lived longer, maybe the nervous system would have found its way into his map too, because toward the end of his life, Jung's curiosity was already shifting. In later years, Jung turned his attention to alchemy, studying Kundalini, writing letters about Tantra and the sacred union of opposites. All of it pointed toward one thing: the body wasn't separate from the psyche, it was part of it. He called it the somatic unconscious, a quiet acknowledgement that the body holds more than biology. It holds memory, meaning, and pattern. So no, Jung didn't map the vagus nerve, but he knew the soul had weight. And if he were here today, listening to the language of trauma, the flinches, the freeze, the shallow breath, he would not dismiss it. He would lean in, not to replace his work, but to continue it. Perhaps you've never thought of yourself as traumatized. You weren't in a war. You weren't abandoned. You don't have memories you can't explain. And yet, you flinch when someone touches you unexpectedly. You tense up when the room gets too loud. You feel numb during conversations, like you're there, but not really. You overwork, overgive, overthink, because stillness feels unfamiliar, maybe even dangerous. That's not a personality trait. That's not a flaw in your wiring. That's your body remembering something you never chose to remember. here's the part that matters. You don't need to figure it out all at once. You don't need to go digging for buried memories or painful backstories. You just need to notice, to breathe, to let your body learn slowly that it doesn't have to brace anymore. This isn't about blame, it's about relief, because what's stuck isn't who you are, and that's where healing begins, not with fixing, but with returning. We've been taught to think healing comes from insight, from understanding, from getting the story right, and sometimes that helps, but real healing doesn't end in the mind. It ends when the body finally feels safe enough to soften. You don't have to decode every dream. You don't have to explain every pattern. You just have to come back to the breath you didn't know you were holding, to the shoulders you always keep tight, to the stillness that used to feel unfamiliar and now maybe doesn't. Carl Jung gave us a map of the soul. He helped us find meaning in darkness and symbols in suffering. But maps can only take you so far. Eventually, you have to arrive. That's what the body is. Not a mystery to solve, but a place to return to. You don't need to be broken to carry trauma, and you don't need to fix everything to begin healing. You just need to feel what's already here, gently, slowly, like it matters, because it does. If you enjoyed today's video, please drop us a like and subscribe. We'll see you again in Mantis Library.